So then, Sharon, what do we do? Like so many um, Unitarian Universalists are non-Indigenous, and we hear stories like what you're saying, and are just like crushed further and further and further of like it just gets worse and worse, and the more Indigenous people we talk to, the worse it sounds, and then the more diversity we have in our UU communities from different types of people, then they tell us we're not being open and accepting of people because of race or because of gender or sexual orientation or whatever it is. It's just like, oh, we're failing, always like that crushing feeling. What do we do? How do we come and rise up in this scenario that we're all living in?
So most of our spiritual leaders in organized religion are men. So we have a male savior that is going to lift us up and bring us home and create a miracle. You know, that's sort of the Western template, whether you're Buddhist, Christian, Muslim, it's all men that are our saviors. And it's a hierarchy. And it's conditional too to behave a certain way. When we're in all my relations, though, I am you and you are me. Everything is connected. And so that is one of the things that I didn't have a grasp of while my granny was alive. But I realized some of her ways of being had to do with the fact that she didn't see you as separate from me. And in all my relations, spirituality, we are connected to the earth. The earth is us, and we are the earth. The universe is a part of us. We talk about the elements of nature like lightning and thunder. We say that that's the creator bringing messages to the earth, and it's the same as when thunder and lightning goes off in your brain or in your heart when you fall in love. So we are nature and everything. So there's nobody, just like what we were talking about at the beginning with our being a, you know, we have the title doctor, but we don't use it because it creates separation. Well, I would suggest that in those holy teachings that those medicine people carried that became institutional relationships all contain kernels of the truth. And somehow, though, the institutions have made it into a hierarchy. It's like Dr. Jesus and Dr. Um, Buddha is not, that was that was a wise person who was part of me and I am part of them. And in my genome, my granny used to start her ceremonies by saying, my grandmother's grandmother's grandmother and my grandfather's grandfather's grandfather, all the way to the first one. And that was her way of saying, remembering we are all relatives here. So then that changes your attitude, because if it's, you know, and we learn from experience. And there were times when my son came home from school with what I would say, a really colonial belief, either about himself or about the world. And those are moments to embrace and reaffirm that, you know, your teacher who said that is a relative, and let's go and have counsel with this teacher so we can share in a good way. Let's do some storytelling. And so then part of parenting was teaching that responsiveness. Just like my granny, when I went to Europe, suggested this because that was her way of protecting me. If I'm over there and I go to their holy people and ask permission and ask for their prayers, that it wasn't just permission, for their prayers, that I would be held in those lands. So it's just respecting the oneness, operating in an all my relations continuum is much different than the hierarchy, which has criticism and judgment attached underneath those beliefs as, the goal for perfectionism. And that creates the hierarchy and the separation, or even the internalized belief, I'm never good enough, I can't measure up. So then, of course, then you add to that I'm an otherness too, I'm an other in society. Then it's such an overwhelming task to be all of who you are in the world and to be responsive. So I think challenging the myth system, which are the train tracks that our brains operate on and society operates on. And I think that's a lot of people don't understand about why we say all my relations at the end of every prayer, because it is an understanding that the trees, the forests are all extensions of ourselves. It's not separate. And we know today science is bearing this out. We're starting to see spaces in our bodies where there's clouds. For example, I work in heart research, and cardiologists don't know what starts a human heart. And the best they can tell is that it's a great mystery. There's a force that ignites the cells to start beating, pa-pump, pa-pump, pa-pump. So 1 minute you have a cluster of cells that form a heart, and the next minute it's alive. What is that? What happened? Well, that is the understanding of life and the, what would I call it? The attitude of connectedness that I had to grow into. I heard it as a concept, but it took years for me to really comprehend and then practice some of what I was watching. Because sometimes when my granny was forgiving, I wasn't ready to forgive. I was a little bit bitter when I went over to Europe because I thought, geez, I don't know if I'm ready to acknowledge their holy people after what happened in my country. I'm like, why did Granny ask me to do this? I wish I was wise and where I'm at today, but I wasn't always. So I was reactive. I wasn't ready to be responsive then. And it's not the job of others to bring people along, but I'm just talking about the general attitude, whatever you can do to bring consciousness around the hierarchy, because that's the thing that says, we've got it right and you are wrong.
If I can share a reflection that I had when you were speaking, trying to remember exactly what you said, but it's along the idea when you're saying about hierarchy and separateness and togetherness. And what came to my mind was, and even as you talk about, these various stories of how people get to be where they are, right? That when we believe that we are separate, right? If that's our fundamental orientation in life, is that you are separate, then it's almost, I don't know if I say this correctly, but we almost give ourselves a little bit too much credit or punishment, as opposed to realizing we are a part of this bigger trend, this bigger thing that's happening. And so what kind of came to my mind is that, as folks that are trying to change the trends, that every time, say, you share your stories with us right now and you become more empowered and you become more authentically you, that is a part of me. It's part of Amber. It's part of whoever is watching, listening this, becoming a greater, less stifled, more free collective. And that sometimes by serving what seems like the opposite role, so, we might think, oh my gosh, I did something and I'm so oppressive. But through that action, a part becomes more conscious and a part gets its voice and a part finds deeper courage and, speaks back. And so we do that for one another. This is what came to my mind when you were speaking, is that that's how evolution happens. And so when we become engaged in this collective dance, so thinking now of, our inclusivity work, and we're in a space, a UU community, there's the choice of being in the silent ones, that nothing contentious happens, and there's no real pressure points, there's no pressure cooking going on, there's nothing that rubs us the wrong way, nothing to, find and dig deeper and give voice to, those sort of things. But my goodness, it's like, the absence of conflict kind of calm, right? As opposed to when we actively engage with courage in this back and forth, then as a collective, like a larger collective, we become more aware, we become more courageous, authentic, expressive, conscious of the thing that we are all a part of and was happening before we were ever born. That's kind of what came to my mind when you're saying stop buying into the hierarchy, because as soon as you do that, you buy into separateness. And when you buy into separateness, then you can get all inflated to think that you yourself did this thing, whatever you think that is, instead of realizing that you're a small yet important part of that bigger picture. So that's what came up in me when you were chatting.
Well, that's exactly walking the beauty walk. Like the Navajo people say, pollen in front of me, pollen behind me, pollen above me, pollen beneath me. It's all around, because pollen brings life. And so rather than like, oh, I'm going to pray to something outside myself to save me, to take it from I am part of all creation. Pollen is inside of me. I am pollen.